Hello, my lovelies. Today, we're going to talk about parenting by personality. And this is one of my favorite topics because my oldest child is the person who put me on the path to personal growth and development when he was only 2 years old. I remember telling my husband that we needed to find a way to keep that child on the straight and narrow because if he went off of it, we might never get him back. And I'm not saying, that's a bad thing, which I will explain, but at the same time, it scared me. So it was time to take some action. And I know that may sound dramatic to some people, but I swear it's true. Look, before we dive in, I want to make clear that what I'm about to share with you are my personal experiences with my own child and what I learned along the way. Your situation may be different, and this is no substitute for medical or mental health intervention, especially if your situation warrants it. This podcast series is designed to help parents understand themselves and their children better based on their personalities. It is not intended to diagnose or treat any mental or physical condition. And if you suspect that you or a family member is at risk of physical or mental harm, please seek proper medical help immediately. Now, back to the story. My oldest child was in a hurry to do everything from the moment of his earthly debut. Within seconds of being born, he opened his eyes and looked directly at his dad and the doctor. And even she commented that that wasn't supposed to be happening. Not yet, anyway. At 2 months old, he would scream the entire time I made dinner unless I sat him up in a walker and put blankets around him so that he could sit up, because he obviously couldn't sit up on his own, but he could hold his head up. And he wanted to watch everything that was going on, and he let me know if he wasn't doing it. He walked at 9 months, and we had to lower the side of the rail on his crib rather than lower the mattress like most people do, because he learned how to climb out of the crib at 9.5 months and flip himself over the rail. Until we lowered the rail, he would just let go and drop to the ground. And I was terrified he was going to break something, like catch his foot and hit his head or something like that. And before you come at me about not lowering the mattress, understand we had a monitor in his bedroom. Back then, it was only audio, but he was so quiet when he climbed the rungs on the rail that I did not hear him until he flipped himself over and then let go and hit the floor. Once, when he was about 10 months old and watching a show, I went to the bathroom and I was gone for less than a minute when I heard a loud thump coming from the kitchen, and then I heard him laughing. Before I could finish and run to the kitchen, I heard it happen again, and as I went running into the kitchen, he had opened a Lazy Susan cabinet, cleared off the Lazy Susan, pulled it out, jumped on it, and was riding it into the cabinet. Just so you know, the door was not attached to the Lazy Susan. So, he wasn't in danger that way. Thank God for small favors. But when I asked him what he was doing, he smiled at me and said, "Ride." And then he just laughed. Y'all, I don't know where he got that idea from, but he literally carried that out in less than a minute. And I had never seen him even notice the Lazy Susan before. And, it kind of reminds me of Hermione from the Harry Potter series. He was brilliant, but scary. And I share all of this to let you know that I know what it's like to have a strong willed and determined child. And a huge part of me is grateful that we had him first, because then we could focus on what to do while only having one child. He definitely sent my husband and me on a journey to be better parents. But me, most of all, because I was at home with him every day and he pushed the limits every day. And I felt like I was failing us both on most of them, to be honest. I listened to so many tapes on personal development and parenting. And yes, it was that long ago. And I found some really great ideas that I'm going to share with you throughout this series. But when I read the book, Positive Personality Profiles, it changed everything and started me on the journey to learn about personalities and how differently people can be wired. Some days, I think that's what saved my sanity as a mom with a very different personality than my children. And other days, I know it's the reason. So, one very important thing to understand about children is that some are the same from the day they're born, and you know it. My oldest had preferences and let you know in no uncertain terms when he was unhappy as a child. He wasn't an unhappy human, but he was very clear about his preferences. Now, my middle was a little more easygoing and always seemed to be happy to go with the flow, especially as a little guy. And we were shocked to find out when they got older that they had the same personality mix, which taught me that even people with the same personality types can be so very different. It also helped me realize why my older two seemed to click when they were younger, and it took longer for them to click with their younger brother, who has a very different personality type than either of them. Now, if you've been around for a while, you're going to know that our oldest has a fair amount of D in his personality mix. And for two very easygoing parents, that made for quite the parenting adventure. So, how did that all play out? In so many ways. But first, I want to share a bit about each of our personality mixes. For those who are new to the podcast, when I talk about personalities, communication, and relationships, I use the DISC personality model of behavior and refer to people as D are driven, I are inspired, S are supportive, and C are cautious. You can find links to take your own personality assessment in the show notes. In the case of our family, I'm an ISD personality type. My husband is SC, and my son is CSD, although I suspect he has more D than he let on at the time he took his assessment. In short, I would characterize us in the following ways. I always say that I want to be a badass, but I don't want to hurt your feelings because I like you. My husband wants to be peaceful and to avoid drama. And our son wants to be successful, but he wants to do it the right way, and he is driven to succeed in all areas of his life. While the D in his personality and mine are lower than the other personality traits, we have enough of it to illustrate how to deal with a driven child in many ways. And I will refer to the comment earlier that when you have a driven child, you know early on because they have purpose and determination and preferences from an early age that most parents admire, but are also a little scared of, unless they're also a D personality. Then things get really interesting. So let's talk about that. Because D children need choices, challenges, and control. They're determined and driven, and when set in a positive direction, they seek out leadership and challenges of all types. They can be directors and leaders of great renown. Without that positive guidance, they can easily become bullies and tyrannical dictators of relationships, homes, and even countries. That's a lot of pressure on parents, and it sometimes requires those parents to step out of their own comfort zone to make sure the driven child gets that positive guidance. In the younger years, these are the children who constantly want to control their own lives. Their favorite phrase as a toddler is, I do it, and heaven help you if you don't let them. Our son got so frustrated when he wanted to put on his own shoes but couldn't at 18 months. Fortunately, that was about the time that Velcro shoes came about and it became a thing. And after I purchased a pair of them, he started putting on his own shoes and he was so happy. He didn't learn how to tie his own shoes until he was 7 because he couldn't have cared less to learn that. But he could put his shoes on by himself long before others. And I called that a parenting win. D children also need choices. If I would tell my son what he was going to wear, even as a little boy and a toddler, it became an issue of negotiation. So instead, I would give him two options and most of the time, that was okay. Occasionally, he would ask for something different, and if it didn't matter if he chose that, I would say yes. Honestly, it saved time, money, and a lot of energy to do that. And rather than it be an area of contention, it was another place where he could excel in the things that were important to him. He could control things. Finally, D children need challenge. They are the kids that love to make everything a competition. We had races to see who could put away more toys, who could put on their seatbelts the fastest, and I thank my sister-in-law for that one, and who could get their pajamas on the fastest at night. As the driven children get older, the control, challenges, and choices change. But when you nurture your child's love of autonomy while making sure that they use their enormous personal power to make the world a better place, you can create some amazing adults. One of the things that driven children sometimes struggle with is taking direction from authority figures. And one of the best ways to work on that skill is to get your child involved with activities where they have to take directions from adults who are not their parents, like they do in sports, dance, theater, and even things like Lego League. It's important that you, as the parent, support the authority figures so that your child will too, and be willing to discuss issues that will arise. And I promise you, they will arise. So set aside time to talk about any issues they might be having and be willing to support both the authority figure and your child's struggle with them. Easier said than done. I understand that. My son played soccer regularly from the time he was 4 years old until after he had his first child. In those years, he had many good coaches, some okay ones, and a few not so good ones. Some of the best coaches for him were the ones that others didn't like because they yelled. But they challenged my son to do better, and he did. He had bigger struggles with coaches who were there only to make sure their son got to play, or they didn't worry about winning because this kid did not like to lose. We had many drives home that began in silence because my son was fuming about a loss and he needed some time to process it. Other times he got in the car and needed to vent his anger right away because he didn't want us to about it. So we let him. But one thing we never did was to tell him he played well when he hadn't, because he knew BS when he heard it. Instead, we talked about what happened and what he could do differently if something similar happened in the future. For him, that was exactly what he needed to turn his attitude around. When he was entering high school, my son conditioned with the varsity soccer team for the entire summer, along with a lot of other boys who did the same thing. A week before tryouts, he hurt his hip and ended up not doing well at tryouts. And he was really upset about the team that he ended up making. Fortunately, the head coach of the program would give feedback after a 24-hour cooling off period. Man, that was brilliant. So we asked what he could do better to make the team he wanted to make the following year. The coach replied with about 8 different points that he said my son could improve. And I had my son read it, and he agreed wholeheartedly with 6 of the 8 and disagreed with 2 of them. So we printed that email out and we told him to get to work. He set his heart on making varsity the next year, as a D child does. They always go for the highest tier, and worked as hard as I'd ever seen him work on anything that season and in the off season as well. After tryouts the following year, the coach said he'd only seen a couple of players in his career that had made as much progress in one season as my son. And while he didn't initially make varsity that year, he got moved up within 3 weeks when a varsity player got injured, and he stayed there for the rest of his high school career. One of the things I want to address too is that the experience for girls can be different because, as parents of driven daughters know, the leadership and driven characteristics that are mostly praised in boys can be criticized in girls. Part of me hopes that's changing fast with the increasing popularity of women's sports and seeing women take leadership roles in the arts and business. but I would be remiss if I didn't address that elephant in the room. So here's my take. Your driven daughter can and will change the world when she learns how to play the game. An out of balance, driven woman will be characterized as a crazy B word always. An imbalanced, driven woman will sometimes be characterized exactly the same way, especially by men and women who are intimidated by them and or who are out of balance themselves. Again, I think this is changing, and my friend, I am here for it. Because you see, I have a granddaughter who's showing signs of having that driven personality. And while it's challenging for her parents at times, I love seeing them nurture that part of her so that she learns to stand in her own power and take up space, not to outshine anyone else, but to shine as she was born to shine. You see, that's my philosophy, that we were all born to shine in our own way. And the most amazing, driven women I know are ready to lead the charge, but they also bring as many people with them as they can, men, women, whatever. And I think that's an exciting place to be. Next, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about how your personality style is important to understand in the parenting dynamic, because depending on your personality type, your experience with your driven child will be different too. If you're a driven parent with a driven child, there will be conflict. And as a deep personality, you are the parent that's okay with that. For you, it's so easy to be direct and to the point, and that serves both you and your driven child well, provided that you're both in balance. You can discuss things directly without hurting each other. You can lay things out in a way no other pair can and come to conclusions in a snap. We saw this with our son when he was deciding where to go to college. He applied to 13 schools, got into 12, but the financial packages ranged from reasonable to ridiculous. One school he got into offered zero scholarships and lots of loans. Essentially, he would have graduated with over $200,000 worth of loan debt, and we would have had over 100,000. And we still needed to come up with over $100,000 on our own. In addition to that, it got very confusing. So my husband created a spreadsheet listing each school, how much their tuition and cost of attendance was, the financial package offered, and the amount our son would owe when he graduated. The amounts ranged from 200,000 plus, as we talked about above, to um, zero for an in-state school that offered him a half tuition scholarship. He looked at that sheet of paper for less than 5 minutes and made his decision. One I don't think he ever regretted, especially when he saw how student loans impacted other people that he knew. So, one of the hallmarks of the D personality is their ability to make decisions quickly. When they lack the C personality trait, they may not take into account mitigating factors, but they also pivot quickly when they see a better way to do things, which can serve them really well as well. That becomes a problem if they pivot too quickly, too many times, and they lose direction. It can also become a situation where they think only of the short term and lack the vision for their long term well being. That impulsivity can also lead them down roads that cause them personal damage. The D personality is the personality that thinks they can control an addiction without help, finish a triathlon with a broken leg, or hit the big money at a table in Vegas when they've already gone way into debt. This is where challenging them to do better can help the D personality the most, if they truly want to get back to better. Offer them a choice of ways to do that and challenge them, and watch them rise to the occasion, because they can if they truly want to. Then they might actually beat the addiction themselves, get medical attention, and try again later for that triathlon, or get out of debt and never gamble their money away again. On the flip side, the driven ones are the people who take risks in business and in life that make them incredibly successful. In our son's case, he started college as an engineering student, even though we felt like that wasn't the place for him. After his sophomore year, he told us he didn't want to be an engineer. And we were like, and? And he said he was going to get his degree and he wasn't going to work in engineering. We said fine. And a few weeks later, a couple of his friends invited him to apply for an internship at a bank where they were working for that summer. He applied and ended up working for that company for the rest of his college career. And they offered him a full-time employment spot before he even started his senior year of college because he dove in, learned about finance, and did the work. That determined spirit of his has served him well in most situations. But I truly think having the mix of C and S personality traits helped him to hone that drive into something extraordinary. If either of us had more D in our personality mix, we probably would have had more conflict. And trust me, he and I had the most because of the D in my personality mix as well as his. But there was one thing that I said to him that I think changed his life in a profound way. More about that in a minute. You see, as an inspired parent, I always wanted to make things fun for my kids. So we made a game, a song, or a story time opportunity out of nearly everything. To this day, I think it was a good parenting decision. But what I learned as the mother of two children with D in their personality mix is that they may appreciate the fun, but when they're pursuing their own goals and dreams, they don't need things to be fun at all. They can buckle down and do the thing. As parents, we sometimes have to temper that for their own well being, but for the most part, it really does help to nurture it. I would remind them to take a breath, to have some fun, to get enough rest, to have a snack, mostly because it was tough watching them learn the lessons of how their excesses and deprivations during focus time could sometimes cause them harm. The good news is that, especially in their younger days, they could come home and regroup. And sometimes that's the best thing an inspired parent can do for their driven child. Now, the supportive part of my personality loves to nurture. And my driven children didn't always love that. They didn't understand how important it was to say goodbye and I love you when they left for the day. And if you are a D personality, I know you're rolling your eyes too, but I explained a couple of things to my children that I was aware of that they took for granted. You see, my husband is a type 1 diabetic. And I understand that anytime he leaves the house, it may be the last time I see him. I know that can happen to anyone. But when your husband totaled his car on the way to work one morning early in your relationship, you don't take that moment for granted. Also, my oldest child started school 6 months after Columbine, the first mass shooting in the US, and 2 years before 9/11. So this nurturing mama made sure the goodbyes, the I love yous, and the hugs happened every day. Again, I don't regret it. The other thing my nurturing did was to teach my children how to be kind to people who needed kindness the most. I've watched these very determined young men do some pretty amazing things, including coaching young children in sports and in building competitions as well. And it makes my S personality so happy to see them giving back, which is something that needs to be nurtured in the driven personality so they don't get stuck in achieving all the time. The other thing we nurtured in our boys was their independence. We pretty much had a policy that as long as they took care of their business well, we would pretty much stay out of it. And that stands to this day. We did, however, let them know that if we thought they weren't keeping up their end of the bargain, we would step in and we were there to help them whenever they needed or wanted help. We were fortunate that our boys had some big dreams and goals because It kept us from having to set too many boundaries, something as parents dislike doing anyway. There were a few, and they were hard for us, but we knew it was for our children's best interest because no 16-year-old needs to be spending nights out all night when they have a boyfriend or girlfriend. And yes, there was a big discussion about that one. Driven children can become entitled adults if they get so addicted to their own achievements that they forget about the support they got all along the way. And sometimes they need a gentle reminder, sometimes not so gentle reminder, that where they are is at least in part because of the people who supported them along the way. But I also heard something amazing that I'm going to paraphrase here. And I think that this is the best way to understand supporting your children, no matter what their personality, as they grow up. Our ceiling, meaning the parent ceiling, is our children's floor, and they will build from that. I think it's powerful to understand that we do the best we can to give our children the best foundation we possibly can so that they can build upon that with confidence and make life even better for themselves and everyone who comes after them. Now let's talk about the cautious personality parenting the driven child. While I have very little C in my personality, my husband has a fair amount. So parenting our D children became an exercise for him in explaining things in a way that made sense to our driven children. One of the great challenges of a C parent with a D child is rules. A cautious personality lives by rules, and the D child is not a fan of them. So your rules better make sense and show the D child how they can benefit from them, or they will not follow them. Simple things like the 2-bite rule when it came to foods they didn't want to try or eat in our home became an area for debate. So my husband made sure that any rule came with an explanation of how the rule would help our children achieve their goals and dreams, like having strong bodies to do the work they wanted to do in the world. And sometimes it's just that simple with the driven child. As they got older, there were more rules with more explanations and discussions. Where things like drinking were concerned, we explained how it would get in the way of their dreams, especially if they were underage and over the legal limit. We knew it didn't completely keep them from doing things they, in quotes, shouldn't, but we also know it made them think before they tried anything. Another thing we gave them was the ability to make us the bad guys. This is incredibly helpful for driven children if they get into situations where people challenge them to try things or to do things that they don't want to do because they so badly want to rise to the challenge of their peers. Instead, we gave them the choice to make us the bad guys. We told our boys that if they ever wanted to get out of something that made them uncomfortable, they could tell their friends that if they did it and got caught, their parents would kill them. It wasn't true, but it gave them the control to get out of a few uncomfortable situations over the years. Hilariously, I even had to tell a few of their friends after they were grown that we really weren't mean parents. And again, I don't regret that either. One of the challenges of talking about parenting and personality in general is the complexity of how the adult and child personality profiles interact and mix. The other thing is that how you interact with one another can be different depending on the situation, especially if you're under stress. That's why I suggest that everyone get a personality assessment. There are multiple versions of the assessments for adults, children, and teens. And if that sounds like a lot, it can be overwhelming, which is why I would suggest that you book a free 15-minute discovery call so that we can figure out what would be the best plan for you moving forward. You may have a question that we can solve in a 15-minute conversation. We might schedule something more, but I assure you that whatever we chat about, you'll have some next steps to improve your relationship with your driven child, no matter what age they are. So go to the Moving Toward Better homepage, sign up for your discovery call, and let's chat soon. As always, if you like what you've heard, please share and subscribe. Until next time, keep moving toward better, whatever that looks like for you. Love you all. At Moving Toward Better, it's our mission to help you unlock a fantastic life, powered by what's unique and authentically you. To learn how we can help you in your quest, head over to movingtowardbetter.com to check it out, or use the links in the show notes. Thanks for listening, thanks for being you, and have a great day. Love you all.